Always happy to be joined by the natural Randy Couture, is going to help me break down PFL 7, the start of the playoffs, believe it or not. It's right around the corner here. Randy, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great, man. Just got back from my charity ride in Seattle, which is always a great weekend. Get back up there where I grew up and see some of my family and friends. And the ride was a huge success. So very, very good.
Excellent. I'm about 3 hours away from Seattle up in Vancouver, Canada. It's a great time of year to be in Washington State. So yeah, you must have had a great time. The weather was good this weekend too.
Yeah, really nice in the 80s. And obviously it's been smoking hot here in Vegas. So we got back to, even last night at landing at 10 o'clock at night, it was still, I think, 109 or 110 last night. It's 114 here today. They're saying this is the hottest weather we've had in Vegas. I'm not buying that. I've lived here 18 years. This is standard operating procedure for July, but all good.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. And so people don't think this is a weather show, Randy. We do got to talk a little PFL. Obviously, the playoffs right around the corner, like I mentioned, August in San Antonio. Looking forward to that. Just kind of looking back at the season, what has maybe been one of the biggest surprises or one of the biggest sort of standout points from this season? It's been very interesting. And like I said, I'm even surprised we're already at the playoffs already.
Yeah, it has gone fast. I think the big surprise coming out of the season was Jesus Pinedo beating Brendan Loughnane. And I don't think anybody saw that coming. And I'm not even sure Jesus saw that coming. I mean, that was a shocker for sure. Brendan looking like he's at the top of his game and peaking and all the right things going on. And he just got caught with a good one right up the middle. And sometimes that's all it takes.
But that's kind of the good part of the format with PFL as well, is it gives someone like Jesus Pinedo, who, again, not maybe a household name, he gets a huge win, and now he's at sort of the forefront of all this, right?
Yeah, he came out of the Challenger Series. He looked great in the Challenger Series. He did a great job. He earned his spot to be in that fight with Brendan, who was last year's champ, and man, did he take advantage of it. And we've seen that time and time again. Carlos Leal, who's made the playoffs again this year, came out of last year's Challenger season and made it all the way to the semifinal, in the playoffs, and then didn't come up a little short, didn't make it to the final. But, Josh Silveira is another one, that came out of nowhere, made it all the way to the finals, came up a little short in the final, and he's back on track to be back in the finals again this season. So really, really interesting. I love this format. I think it gives fans a rooting interest. You find the guys you like or don't like, you get to watch them transition through the whole thing. Fighting, 4 times in 8 months is no small feat.
Yeah, and I think the Challengers, this series, like you just mentioned there, you're creating new stars. They're homegrown talent. It's not a case of, maybe bringing over a free agent, although I know they have done that, but it's still nice to see that they're, sort of building guys from within, which is a great thing as well. PFL 7, I mentioned it there. We've got Bubba Jenkins on this card. We got Impa. Just how excited are you? Because again, it seems like the playoffs are really kicking off with some big names here. Obviously Jenkins, mainstay in PFL for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Bubba, last year's finalist, national champion for Arizona State, got an amazing wrestling pedigree. He had a loss a couple seasons ago against Chris Wade that I think really humbled him, and we've seen him knuckle down, add some new skills, a new mentality to his game, and he's really, really looked impressive. He looked impressive last season against Brendan, and beating Chris Wade in the semifinal, which they had a big beef, with each other. And so I'm excited for him and his opportunity. Obviously, Impa is a really, really interesting story. Here's a guy that's living in a yurt in Florida, came out of the Challenger Series, made it all the way through, and he's in the playoffs and has a shot at being in the finals. Martin Hamlet is one of the guys I like. Obviously came from that similar background that I have in Greco-Roman wrestling, myself and several others. So, I've been very eagerly watching him develop. He's a big, strong, raw-boned kid who's starting to sort out how to fit his wrestling expertise and background into that cage and into MMA situations.
And even looking past PFL 7, we have obviously a number of playoff matchups kind of already confirmed. Do you think we could see some upsets? Because like we just mentioned with Brendan Loughnane, there's certainly the potential for that to happen.
I think there's no way we don't, honestly. Yeah. Name me a season, a playoff, a championship that we haven't had that. And this year has been hugely that way a lot. We've seen a lot of big surprises coming through the regular season and into the playoffs. So I don't see any way we don't see some big upsets. It's going to be very, very interesting.
And speaking of surprises, I know it's not 100% confirmed yet. It looks like Movilid is out of the playoffs, some sort of injury or whatever. How much, if that does end up, coming to fruition that he's out, how much of a blow is that? Obviously, the 2021 champ, guy that I think a lot of people are excited to see compete.
Yeah, he's an amazing competitor. Obviously, he's coming off an injury, which kept him out last season.
Yeah.
He looked rusty in that first fight, but boy, his second fight, he looked right on track. He looked like the Mobley we're used to seeing. It's a shame to have him go out that way, but that might open the door for a Brendan Loughnane to get back in there, to a Chris Wade to get back in there. You know, those guys are chomping at the bit to get another crack. You know, things didn't go the way they thought they were going to go this season. Wade has been knocking on that door forever and is absolutely due. And I'm sure Brendan will be all over the opportunity if he gets the call.
Yeah, we'll be interested to see what happens there. PFL not only winning in the cage, but outside the cage as well. How about this? Your good buddy, Francis Ngannou, securing that fight with Tyson Fury. Just how excited are you for him? Because this was the thing, right? Was he wanted to leave the UFC to go on his own, and he gets this mega fight, and all these people saying, oh, he fumbled the bag, he fumbled the bag. Well, I'm pretty sure if you're fighting Tyson Fury, you're not fumbling the bag.
Yeah, no, I think he's done the right thing. He stood up for himself. He stood up for our sport. There have been several other athletes that were in position to do that and passed and didn't do it. I'm proud of him for doing that, sticking to his guns. You know, it wasn't about the money. It was about all the other stuff that he's mentioned and I've certainly mentioned and stood up for myself. So I think being the chairman of the board for PFL Africa was the big swing that pushed him towards the PFL. He gets to develop talent and develop opportunities for guys that are in the same boat that he was in when he lived in Cameroon. So I think that's what it was all about. I was very impressed. He was with us on all the meetings in Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
and
cool.
as impressed as I was for him physically, seeing him in the gym, training with him a little bit, his work ethic, how humble he is, his willingness to put himself out there in some uncomfortable positions and situations to improve himself and make himself well-rounded and better. I was even more impressed with his input into how we grow talent and how we create opportunities in both North Africa and Africa in general and the Middle East. So those regions are very, very closely connected. So he was at all those meetings and man, a whole new level of respect for him.
Were you surprised to see him fight Tyson? We talked last time and we weren't sure if something was going to happen. Did it? Okay. So yeah, that's the answer.
I think it's a big step up, honestly. Yeah. I mean, this guy's been boxing at that level. I mean, and he is arguably the best boxer in the world right now. And has been at the top of that game for quite a while. I mean, what he did with Wilder and all those matches, his technique he's long, he's rangy, he moves his head and his feet well. He's going to be hard to hit. Francis has got a lot of work to do to get ready and get sharp for that. You can never count Francis out because he has that one innate thing, that knockout power that you can never count out. I think skill-wise, he's probably in a little over his head with the guy like Tyson Fury, and that's just the truth of the matter. I mean, Francis is one of my guys, but that's my honest assessment. Does he have a shot? He absolutely has a shot, but is he up against it? No doubt about that.
Well, and the great thing is after, this fight, the boxing match, I should say, PFL, obviously we know that if he fights whoever opponent, that opponent's going to get, a guaranteed purse of millions of dollars. So that's another reason we were just talking about there. It's not just about money. He's getting his opponent paid too, which is great.
Yeah. Amazing. That had to get every other heavyweight in the world's attention. I mean, there's a whole plethora of guys out there that are never going to see two bills like that. And he negotiated his opponent's purse, which is unheard of. That has never been done in the sport as far as I know.
Switching gears a little bit, we have this BMF title fight coming up at the end of next month in the UFC. What do you make of that as someone who's a former champion in the UFC? Do you like it? Do you think it's cool? Do you think it's necessary? I've always been of the belief if the fight's good enough, it should still headline a pay-per-view. Don't need a title, but what's the Natural's thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's all for the fans, in my opinion. That honestly, that's why do they do the interim fights the way they do? There's true. I was one of the first ones to step up and get an interim shot against Chuck Liddell. It was something they do to create that extra layer of speciality for the pay-per-views and for the fans that want to tune in and watch those fights. I haven't watched a single one of those fights, honestly, unless it's an Extreme Couture guy fighting in one of those. I'm probably not tuning in. I don't place a lot of weight or merit on the BMF title belt, but sure, cool. Why not add that to your collection?
Obviously, it's Porier and Gaethje fighting in their rematch. Porier won the first fight. Gaethje coming off a really nice win over Fiziev. Who do you give the edge to in that fight? Because obviously there is something to be said, and this, for having a rematch, right?
Yeah, and I think the guy that won the last one, that's the onus is always on that guy. The other guy's going to make some changes and make some adjustments, see where he made mistakes, and make those adjustments, you're taking a wild ass guess as to what those changes are going to be as the
Yeah.
guy that won and wants the same outcome. So I think it always puts the onus on the guy that won the first fight. Those guys are both amazing competitors, and they're fun, and they're going to bring it. It's going to be a fun fight to watch for sure. And their tactics and technique are almost polar opposites. They approach fights much differently, which always makes for an interesting fight.
On that same card, we have Alex Pereira moving up to 205 pounds. Obviously, Alex is sort of a protege of Glover Teixeira. You're going to be fighting the former champion Blachowicz. What do you make of Pereira's move up? Because he looks like a light heavyweight anyways. I think he's going to be fine in the weight class.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this again and again in the PFL. Guys that stop cutting all the weight. And this is a very American thing for sure. But the guys that stop cutting, Capolosa, I'm right on down the line. Guys that stop cutting all the weight and move up a weight class, they settle in. They feel comfortable. They got their energy back. They have their love for the sport back, because nothing will cut your love for the sport quicker than cutting all that dang weight. So I think that bodes well for him. I think he's plenty big enough for that weight class. He's certainly technically sound enough to go in there and compete with the bigger guys. And honestly, I don't think they're bigger. I think he should be at 205.
Yeah, he is actually going to have a little bit of an advantage over Jan. Do you think Pereira gets it done? That's my question, because obviously he's knocking guys out at 185. It's a different animal at 205, I think. You got Blachowicz a little bit more well-rounded. Who would you give the edge to there?
Man, it's tough for me to call. I haven't been on the mat with either one of those guys or even followed them. It'd be one thing if I'd been commentating for them and seen them tactically and technically perform several times, but that's not the case. So I'd be going way out on a limb, even trying to put a stamp on that one way or the other, to be honest.
We talked about surprising that Francis is fighting Tyson Fury. How about John Jones and Stipe finally fighting? This was something that seemed a bit up in the air, but it's happening in November. Randy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love it. And I think that should have been John Jones and Francis, frankly. That's what everybody wanted to see, at least for a long time. But Stipe is an amazing competitor. Obviously, it'll be interesting because he's just as long and tall as John is, which is rare for John to face somebody that's as big as he is, certainly in 205, but at heavyweight. Obviously he made quick work of gains, and I think he has all the skills he needs. I think Stipe brings some interesting things to this. Stipe brings some good wrestling to this matchup, and John doesn't have to defend himself in that realm very often. He uses his length, he uses his striking, and he uses his wrestling to put guys on their back, then use those long elbows and those long levers to be effective from that top position. It'll be tough for him to do that against Stipe. It may come down to that striking battle and who has their way there. It's a very interesting matchup. I like Stipe's chances in that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting, and I'm with you. Don't count out Stipe. I know you look at the age and the layoff, but this is a guy that competed very well in that weight class, one of the best ever. Jones's old division, 205. I got to ask you this as a former light heavyweight champion yourself. Is it cursed, Randy? Are we at that point now? Jamal Hill, I don't know if you just heard, injured, had to vacate his title. Yuri Prohaska before that, injured, had to vacate his title. And then we had obviously the title changing hands after John left. Is it cursed, or is this just all bad luck?
I think it's just misfortune. I don't believe in that kind of bad luck. I don't think things run that way. I just think it's some misfortune and, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. Maybe serendipity is the wrong term, because that's a little more positive, I think, than people getting injured and losing their titles. But it's one of those things. It's indigenous to our sport. It's happened over the years. We've had spells before where things like this have stacked up. And so I don't think it's cursed or any of that. I think it's just misfortune.
I don't know how close you were with him. Kevin Lee announcing his retirement. I don't know if you caught that at all. A little bit surprising just with his age. I know he's had some injuries and stuff, but what was your reaction to hearing that news? Because it kind of
it's such a personal thing, and I've said this before. When everyone was talking about whether Chuck was going to retire or not, and when I retired, it took me a year to come to terms with walking away with that big piece of my identity. And Kevin's no different. He's been an amazing performer, right at the highest level in our sport. And sometimes psychologically, mentally, once that voice starts talking about, hey, maybe it's time to do something else, especially after a couple of injuries, you need to take that seriously. It's a very volatile, very tough sport. It's a tough way to make a living. And if you're not in it 100%, both psychologically and physically, it's very, very difficult. So I'm not surprised. I think he's probably making the best decision for him. He's got a lot of life ahead of him. Why continue to put himself in harm's way and potentially sustain an injury that's going to affect the quality of the rest of his life?
Well said. Well said. Okay, before we go, I do have to mention this. Georges St-Pierre coming back to grapple. Surprised by that? And who do you think he should fight? I think he should grapple Khabib. I think that's a good option.
I mean, would that be amazing? That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I'm actually surprised it's taken this long for George to come back out. I mean, there were inklings for a while there that he was going to come back and fight, and a couple of people, including Khabib, trying to get him to come back out and fight. And I thought he might do that. I think, ring rust is real. You got to be honest and be serious and assess yourself, how long you've been sitting out. And I've challenged that a couple times myself, sitting out for 12, 13 months and trying to come back, and it makes it difficult. So I think the grappling is a great place to start for George. That's when I took the big layoff in 06 after the third Chuck loss. The thing that got me back into that competitive mindset and those juices flowing again was that professional submission league match, against Jacare. And I was like, man, that was amazing. That felt so good. And I think George is going to experience the same thing. It's going to get that blood flowing again, and he's going to want to fight again. I think that's probably where we're headed.
And interviewing you always gets my blood flowing, Randy. Appreciate it. I'll give you the last word here, sir. PFL 7, August 4th, San Antonio. Anything else I'm missing? I'll give you the last word.
Man, I'm excited to be in San Antonio. I wish I was going to have more time to kind of poke around, go see the Alamo and some of the other stuff that's down there, because it's an amazing city. They've done a great job with the city walk and all the things down there. It's going to be interesting to be in the Boeing Center down there. So I'm happy that we're in San Antonio. It's always great to be in New York in the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden for the second and third installments of the playoffs. So always excited to be back there. But man, looking forward to the playoffs and see who gets the nod and gets a shot at $1 million and a new title belt.